They live in a different rhythm, not necessarily faster, but more exact and precise, almost spiritual in its execution. To understand the 1% who never waste time, you cannot simply look at their schedules, you must look at their psychology. For these individuals, time is not merely a clock on the wall, but a mirror that reflects their clarity, their hunger, and their unfinished ghosts. They do not begin their morning by asking what they should do. They ask, what deserves my life today? This single distinction rewires the nervous system, removing distraction through a sense of devotion rather than sheer discipline. The architecture of protection. These high performers were not born efficient, they were born restless. Somewhere in their history, they realized that losing control of time cost them something deep, perhaps a moment of humiliation, a broken trust, or a childhood where they had to grow up too soon. This early experience taught them that being behind is equivalent to being vulnerable. Consequently, they built lives around speed, but beneath that velocity is fear refined into focus. Their intensity is often mistaken for arrogance, but it is actually a form of protection. They move fast to stay safe from the slow ache of regret and to prevent idle moments from awakening questions they are not yet ready to face. You can see this in how they speak. Every sentence has architecture, and every conversation has a hidden goal to extract meaning and measure value. Their boundaries are not just about efficiency, they are about emotional preservation. To them, time wasted with someone unclear feels like a betrayal of themselves. They have learned that indecision is a thief that robs energy before it even robs minutes. In their world, doubt is seen not as humility, but as an expensive energy leak. When they walk away from projects or decline invitations, it may look cold, but it is a psychological act of self-regulation. They have internalized the truth that every yes to the unimportant dilutes their very identity. The haunted achiever. Beneath the efficiency lies a deeper pattern, a quiet terror of being ordinary, often born from early experiences of feeling invisible. The high performer's obsession with time is frequently a delayed rebellion against that invisibility. They refuse to allow themselves to disappear again, treating attention as a currency to be managed selectively and strategically. To lose their time is to be quietly erased. To be given their time is to be seen as significant. They do not chase balance, which they view as mediocrity. Instead, they chase alignment, moments where effort meets inevitability. However, there is a brutal paradox here. The people most obsessed with not wasting time often lose touch with what time is actually for. Their calendars are full, but their souls may feel delayed. Success becomes a substitute for stillness because they fear that stopping might reveal an underlying emptiness. In their minds, slowing down equals slipping backward, so even rest must be made productive. They meditate to optimize and journal to strategize, turning even their healing into a form of achievement. If you listen closely, there is fatigue disguised as focus, a quiet longing to be unmeasured. They are haunted by what might happen if they ever waste themselves, leading them to squeeze potential from every second. While this clarity makes others feel safe and organizes chaos, it often costs them the softness where connection lives. The transition from conquest to presence. The evolution of the ultra-successful begins when they realize that their mastery was actually just managing anxiety. They start to see that time is not an enemy to be conquered, but a relationship to be understood. This shift occurs when the need to optimize every moment softens, and they sense that time bends to meaning. They discover that an hour of alignment can stretch further than a day of efficiency. Psychologically, this is where control begins to dissolve because it starts to feel like a limitation rather than safety. Often, a quiet collapse, such as burnout or betrayal, breaks their identity and forces them to confront the emotional scaffolding underneath their achievements. They are forced to ask, "What am I when I pause?" This pause exposes the fear of not being enough without evidence of productivity. Eventually, they realize that how they spend time reveals what they believe they deserve. When they believe they are enough, even unproductive minutes start to feel sacred. They move from the vocabulary of grind to the language of flow, replacing a full calendar with a fulfilled soul. Surrender and the new mastery. True mastery shifts from the extraction of results to the skill of presence. Presence requires a surrender that feels unnatural to the 1%, as it demands they let time unfold instead of trying to extract it. By confronting everything they avoided through busyness, neglected relationships, and ignored emotions, they return time to the parts of themselves that were exiled in the name of efficiency. They learn to trust cycles of intense creation followed by stillness, understanding that the pause is not failure, but preparation. As they step from control mode into trust mode, they realize that not every outcome needs to be forced. They discover a hidden truth. Time mirrors your emotional state. When you are anxious, time accelerates. When you are peaceful, it stretches. Slowing down doesn't steal time, it expands it. Their original drive to control fate through time begins to transform into a gentler safety rooted in connection. They stop asking how to win faster and start asking what is worth winning at all. The freedom of being. The final stage of this psychological evolution is the realization that time was never meant to be managed, but to be loved. The ticking clock stops sounding like pressure and starts sounding like presence. They begin to forgive the younger self that equated rest with regression and exhaustion with excellence. Their days take on a rhythm that is not necessarily slower, but more felt. They stop living from fear and start living from intimacy with the moment. In this integrated state, the achiever and the human merge. They no longer exile the parts of themselves that crave softness or art. Their authority becomes quiet rather than nervous. They speak slower because they finally trust silence. They move from chronos, the chronological time of the clock, to kairos, the felt time of significance. They begin to measure their return on life, ROL, rather than just ROI, realizing that a 5-minute conversation with genuine connection can shift more in them than a 5-hour meeting filled with metrics. The ultimate freedom arrives when their value no longer depends on output. They realize they were never afraid of wasting time, but of facing the parts of themselves that didn't know how to rest. Rest is no longer seen as the opposite of work, but the repair of self-rust. They understand that the most powerful use of time is not to build empires, but to deepen consciousness and to wake up inside the minutes that others overlook. Time doesn't belong to the disciplined, it belongs to the devoted, because devotion is the only thing that turns minutes into meaning. Standing in the quiet between seconds, they realized the real wealth was never in what they achieved, but in how deeply they allowed themselves to live inside each passing moment.